That 4-year-old beggar girl finds a millionaire being forced to carry a cross on a rural road, but she appears behind the aggressor and does something that shocks everyone. Watch until the end. Comment, giving a score from 0 to 10. For my story, your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. Chapter 1. The scream sliced through the stifling afternoon air like a razor, echoing through the cobblestone streets of the historic town of Willow Creek, Montana. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity that made anyone's heart clench. The 30-year-old millionaire, Sterling Lancaster, watched from the window of his luxury condo. His leading man looked striking even when he was worried. His strong features and elegant bearing contrasted with the tense expression that took over his face as he looked at the run-down Victorian across the street. The fortune he had accumulated over the years by investing wisely in the stock market allowed him to live in every possible comfort, but none of that mattered when he heard those screams that seemed to tear at the soul. His net worth in dollars could solve many problems, but there was something about that situation that left him completely paralyzed, unable to act. Across the street, inside the faded yellow house with peeling blue window frames, the 4-year-old girl, Juniper, huddled in the corner of the kitchen. Despite her age, she looked only 2, so small and fragile that she astonished anyone who saw her. Her skinny arms trembled as she tried to hide from the woman who approached with something hot in her hands. The aunt who had cared for her since she lost her parents showed no affection or compassion. Her eyes, red from the whiskey she had been drinking since early afternoon, fixed on the child with a senseless rage. The little girl had learned that screaming only made things worse, but the pain was so great that she couldn't contain herself. "You are a curse on this house," the woman hissed, firmly holding the metal utensil that had been heating on the stove. "Because of you, I lost everything good in my life." The girl squeezed her eyes shut, trying to remember happy moments that seemed so distant. There was a song her mother used to sing, a soft melody that was now all that remained of love in her memory. She began to hum softly, as if those notes could create an invisible shield around her. Sterling stopped reviewing his investments when he heard the faint but familiar sound. He knew that song from somewhere, but he couldn't quite remember where. He moved closer to the window again, trying to locate the origin of that sad melody that cut through the air like a silent cry for help. It was the first time in weeks that he had paid attention to anything beyond the obvious suffering. There was something in that childish voice that touched a part of his heart that he thought had died long ago. The song spoke of free birds, open skies, and hope, contrasting cruelly with the dark reality of that house. The retired schoolteacher who lived next door, Miss Eleanor Ainsworth, also heard the singing. During her 40 years of teaching children, she had developed a special instinct for recognizing when one of them was in danger. That voice carried a pain that made her chest ache with anguish. While watering her begonias, she watched the window of the house next door, noticing how she never saw the child playing in the yard or running around the streets like the others in town. There was something deeply wrong with that situation, something that her years of experience did not allow her to ignore. The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by an even more disturbing silence. The teacher wiped her hands on her apron and made a decision that would change many lives. The next day, she would pay a visit to that house. She needed to meet the child who sang with so much sadness. Sterling remained at the window even after the silence returned. Something had awakened inside him, a restlessness that he hadn't felt in years. Memories began to form in his mind, fragments of something he preferred to keep buried. There was an employee who had worked for him years ago, a kind woman who always hummed while organizing documents. What had happened to her? Why had she left his company so abruptly? And why was that familiar song coming from a house where a child was obviously suffering? The questions piled up in his mind, creating a storm of guilt and regret that he didn't know how to face. As night fell over the historic town, the girl finally managed to fall asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. In her dreams, she flew with the birds she secretly drew on the walls, far from everything that hurt her. Across the street, a rich and powerful man fought against demons of the past that threatened to destroy the emotional barrier he had built around his heart. But the echo of that childish song continued to resonate in his mind, as if it were a call that he could no longer ignore. For the first time in years, he felt that perhaps it was time to pay attention to what was happening beyond his own windows. Fate had already begun to weave the threads that would unite their lives irreversibly. Chapter 2. The following morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread that rose through the streets of the historic town. But for the retired schoolteacher, nothing could disguise the anxiety she felt. She had spent the whole night thinking about that sad voice, that song that seemed like a muffled cry for help. She put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with special care, preparing for a mission that she knew would be delicate. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the Victorian house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until dragging footsteps approached. The woman who opened the door had a puffy face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of a night of drinking. Her strong smell of alcohol was noticeable even from a distance. "Good morning," said the teacher with her gentlest smile. "I'm your neighbor, Eleanor Ainsworth, and I've come to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we've had a proper chat." The girl's aunt hesitated, running her hand through her disheveled hair. There was something in her movements that betrayed nervousness, as if she were hiding something important. "It's not a good time. The house is a mess," she mumbled, trying to block the entrance. "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long," insisted the teacher, taking a step forward with the authority that decades of classroom experience had given her. "And I would love to meet your niece. I heard she's an adorable girl." The woman's face hardened for an instant before forcing a weak smile. "The child is sick, high fever. Better not get close." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged across the floor. The teacher pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. It was a sound she knew well from decades of dealing with little ones trying to hide. Across the street, Sterling watched the scene from his window while having breakfast. His investments in Bitcoin had done well overnight, but his mind was completely focused on that strange interaction unfolding in front of the Victorian house. There was something about the woman's posture that bothered him deeply. The teacher noticed the nervous hands of the girl's aunt, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol that emanated from her even though it was so early. All the signs she had learned to recognize during decades of dealing with troubled families were there, screaming and impossible to ignore. Inside the house, the girl was crouched behind the kitchen table, trying to reach a glass of water from the sink. Her height didn't allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process, creating the noise that had attracted attention. Thirst consumed her, but she knew that asking for anything would result in painful consequences. "Didn't I tell you to stay in the room?" growled the aunt, closing the door quickly and heading to the kitchen with irritation intensified by the unexpected visit and the hangover. Her voice carried a threat that made the child tremble with fear. "I was thirsty," murmured the girl, her big eyes fixed on the floor, trying to make herself even smaller to avoid the fury she knew was coming. Her voice was so low that it could barely be heard. The aunt laughed bitterly, a cruel sound that echoed through the small house. "Thirsty? Then go get water in the yard. And since you like making so much noise, you can stay outside until I decide you can come in." The girl went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls where a single tree offered shade. There she sat on the ground and began to draw with a piece of charcoal she had found. It was always birds, small, big, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches that represented her only form of escape. Hours passed slowly under the hot sun. The aunt had locked the back door, leaving the child in the yard without water or food. The girl began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So she began to sing her mother's song softly, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached the millionaire's ears again. This time, he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar about that voice, that specific song that awakened memories he preferred to keep dormant. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without thinking, began to record. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind like pieces of a disturbing puzzle. There had been an exemplary employee who had worked at his company years ago, a woman who always hummed this same song while organizing important documents. She had disappeared abruptly, leaving only a formal resignation letter. The employee always spoke fondly about her little daughter, a girl whose name... The millionaire closed his eyes, forcing his memory. Her name was the same as what he heard the neighbors whisper when referring to the child in the Victorian house. The realization hit him like a punch in the stomach, almost making him drop his cell phone. The child suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the kind woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. How had he not made that connection before? The guilt he carried for other reasons multiplied, now including regret for not having helped when she clearly needed it. He vaguely remembered the employee mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties she was trying to solve. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time that he hadn't paid due attention. His businesses thrived, his investments yielded fortunes, but he had failed as a human being. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, punctually, the screams started again. This time the millionaire did not move away from the window. He watched with growing horror as, through the kitchen window of the Victorian house, he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and began to record, this time with unwavering determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him completely nauseous. The aunt was holding something in her hands that appeared to be a heated utensil and gesturing violently towards a small figure that he could barely distinguish. The girl's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time he couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. His net worth, his profits in stocks, all his wealth seemed insignificant in the face of that scene of horror. For the first time in years, he felt a genuine fury burning in his chest, mixed with a devastating guilt that threatened to consume him completely. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything forever. The question now was, what would he do with this information? How could a man who had spent years building emotional walls around his heart find the courage to tear down those barriers and act? Chapter 3. 3 days had passed since the millionaire discovered the child's identity, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire that gave no respite. During these days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at the same time, always with the same methodical brutality that made his stomach churn. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by a cowardice that deeply ashamed him. His investments continued to yield substantial dividends. His businesses thrived without his full attention, but none of that mattered when he saw that girl suffering so close to his window. The money he had accumulated over the years seemed useless in the face of his own emotional paralysis. That Thursday morning, the retired schoolteacher made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering a few feet from her house. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and all of them were present in the Victorian house. The abnormal silence, the absence of the child playing, the occasional screams that cut through the air. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of trying a new direct visit, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from where she had the best view of the backyard of the house next door. What she saw left her completely horrified. The girl was sitting under the tree, completely alone, wearing only a torn t-shirt. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed, others already scarred in dark tones that told a story of prolonged suffering. The child drew on the ground with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that the teacher recognized as birds. "My God," whispered the educator, her hands trembling as she held the fence that separated the yards. It was much worse than she imagined. Reality surpassed her worst fears about what was happening in that house. The girl looked up and saw the lady watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to the teacher's surprise, the child smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved timidly with her small hand. "Hi, Grandma," said the girl in her tiny voice, using the affectionate way she treated all the elderly ladies she met. There was a sweetness in her voice that contrasted cruelly with the marks of suffering on her fragile body. "Hi, honey," replied the teacher, struggling to keep her voice steady while her heart broke into pieces. "Are you okay there alone?" The girl looked quickly at the windows of the house before answering, an automatic gesture of fear that revealed the constant terror in which she lived. "Yes, I am. I'm just drawing pretty birds." "That's beautiful. Do you like birds a lot?" asked the teacher, trying to keep the conversation natural while discreetly observing the marks on the child's arms. "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," replied the girl, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke anyone's heart. "They are free, and no one hurts them when they are flying high." At that moment, the aunt's harsh voice echoed from inside the house like a threatening thunder. "Juniper, where are you? Come here now!" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything the teacher needed to know. The girl got up quickly, wiped her hands on her t-shirt, and ran into the house, but not before looking once more at the teacher with an expression that screamed for help in a silent and desperate way. The teacher remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen and heard. The burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to the aunt's voice. Everything confirmed her worst fears about what was happening there. She could no longer pretend that she didn't know or that it wasn't her problem. Across the street, the millionaire had witnessed the entire interaction through his privileged window. He managed to see the yard partially, and the sight of the marks on the girl's arms left him completely nauseous. For the first time in 5 years, he felt a genuine fury burning in his chest, mixed with a guilt that threatened to suffocate him. His former employee had trusted him in some way, even if indirectly. She had left her daughter in the care of a family who lived in the same town where he lived comfortably. And now that child was being tortured while he watched from his luxurious window, paralyzed by his own cowardice and by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him for years. At 11 in the morning, the teacher made a courageous decision that would change everything. She put on her best social outfit, took a tray of homemade cookies she had prepared as a pretext, and headed again to the Victorian house. This time, she would not accept a no for an answer, no matter what happened. The aunt answered the door with even greater reluctance, clearly irritated by the neighbor's insistence. Her eyes were redder than last time, and the smell of alcohol was even stronger, indicating that she had started drinking earlier that day. "I already said it's not a good time," mumbled the woman, trying to block the entrance once more. "Honey, I brought some cookies that I made yesterday," interrupted the teacher firmly, using all the authority that decades of classroom experience had given her. "And I insist on getting to know the little one better. As old neighbors, it is our duty to support each other, especially in difficult times." Before the aunt could protest, the teacher had already entered the house, pushing gently but determinedly. The interior of the Victorian house was even darker than she imagined. It smelled of mold, mixed with cheap alcohol. There were dark stains on the floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, and a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. "The girl is sleeping," lied the aunt, blocking the way to the back of the house with her body. "She had a difficult night with the fever." "What a pity. Maybe another time then," said the teacher, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. A metal spoon left on the stove, small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child, and mainly marks on the floor that suggested that something heavy had been dragged recently. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to someone with experience in dealing with traumatized children. The teacher and the aunt froze, the tense silence revealing more than any confession could. "It must be the neighbor's cat," said the aunt quickly, but her voice trembled slightly, betraying the nervousness she was trying to hide. Her hands began to shake visibly. The teacher smiled and nodded, but had decided that she had already seen enough to take a definitive action. She knew exactly what she needed to do, and this time she would not hesitate for even a second. "Well, I'll let you rest then, but remember that I'm always here next door if you need anything at all." The teacher's tone made it clear that it was not just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning, loaded with all the implications that an experienced educator could transmit. The aunt understood the message perfectly, and fear began to mix with anger in her red eyes. Chapter 4. After the teacher left, the aunt locked the door tightly and headed to the kitchen, where she found the girl huddled behind the wood stove, trying to hide like a wounded animal. The child had cried when she heard the teacher's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known, and that now seemed to belong to another world, distant and unattainable. "You were making noise," accused the aunt, her eyes already shining with the familiar fury that the girl knew so well. The alcohol had intensified her irritation with the unexpected visit, and now she needed a target to unleash all her accumulated frustration. "No, Aunt, I didn't make noise," protested the girl, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. She knew that it didn't matter what she said. There would always be an excuse for what was to come next. There would always be a justification for the pain. The aunt picked up the metal spoon that was on the stove and put it directly in the blue flame. The girl recognized the terrible ritual and began to tremble uncontrollably. She knew exactly what was coming next. She knew every step of that systematic torture that had become part of her daily routine. "You want to attract attention, don't you?" hissed the aunt, as the spoon heated up until it turned red. "You want the neighbors to come here and ask questions. Do you think I don't know how to take care of you properly?" Across the street, the millionaire had positioned his cell phone on the window and was recording again. This time, he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything forever. He could no longer be just a silent observer, not when his own past negligence had contributed to that situation. His former employee had been a good person, a dedicated woman who always talked about her daughter with unconditional love. That child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. His capital accumulated over the years would finally have a purpose greater than simply generating more wealth. As the girl suffered through another episode of systematic torture, the millionaire made a call he hadn't made in months. He called his personal lawyer, an old college buddy, a man he trusted completely for delicate matters, named Franklin Hayes. "I need your help with a very serious situation," he said, watching through the window as the girl's screams echoed through the afternoon like stabs at his conscience. "It's about a child, and I think it could be a matter of life or death." The lawyer well aware of the emotional isolation his friend had built after devastating personal losses, was surprised by the urgency in his voice. "Tell me everything. What's going on?" "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine," Sterling explained, his voice laden with guilt and determination. "She's being abused by the aunt who cares for her. I have evidence, recordings of what's happening." "That's very serious," the lawyer replied, immediately understanding the gravity of the situation. "If you have evidence of child abuse, we need to act immediately. I'll contact the competent authorities." That night, after the aunt passed out drunk on the living room couch, Juniper managed to sneak out to the yard silently. Her new burns throbbed terribly, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her small heart. She sat under the tree and looked at the stars, humming her mother's song softly. What she didn't know was that, for the first time in months, someone was truly paying attention to her suffering. And that, in the coming days, her life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine in her most optimistic dreams. The lawyer arrived at Sterling's condo on Friday morning with a grave expression on his face. The two men had been classmates at university almost 3 decades ago, and he knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after devastating losses. Therefore, the urgent phone call the night before had surprised him so much. "I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," the lawyer said, sitting in the spacious living room of the luxurious apartment. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need all the details so we can act appropriately." Sterling poured coffee and positioned himself near the window, the place that had become his obsession in recent days. His investments in stocks continued to yield substantial profits, but none of that mattered when compared to what he was about to reveal. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine," he began, choosing his words carefully. "She's being abused by the aunt who cares for her. Burns, daily screams, complete neglect." The lawyer was silent for a moment, processing the information with the professional seriousness that the situation demanded. "And you have concrete evidence of what you're claiming?" "I have recordings," Sterling replied, picking up his cell phone. "Visual and auditory evidence of what's happening in that house. It's worse than you can imagine. If that's true, we need to contact Child Protective Services immediately," said the lawyer, his expression becoming even more serious. "But there's something else, isn't there? You feel responsible for some reason." Sterling nodded, the guilt weighing on his shoulders like a physical burden. "The girl's mother worked for me for 3 years. She left abruptly years ago, a few months before, before other personal problems I faced. I never understood why at the time, but now you realize that maybe she was asking for help and you didn't pay attention," completed the lawyer, understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. At that moment, the familiar sound of screams echoed from the house across the street, even though it was only 9 in the morning. Both men turned to the window, and the lawyer could see the look of anguish on his friend's face. It was obvious that this was consuming Sterling in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "Does this happen every day?" asked the lawyer, clearly horrified by what he was hearing. "At 3 in the afternoon, religiously, but sometimes at other times too," replied the millionaire, picking up his cell phone to show the recordings he had collected. "Do you want to see the evidence?" The lawyer watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a specialist in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse throughout his career, but something about the systematization of that violence disturbed him deeply. It was methodical, calculated, cruel, in a way that went beyond simple loss of control. "This can't continue for another day," said the lawyer firmly. "I need you to give me all these recordings today. I'll contact Child Protective Services and the district attorney. This child needs to be removed from that house immediately." "How long will that take?" asked Sterling, his anxiety evident in his voice. "With this evidence, we can act today," replied the lawyer. I'll make the necessary calls now, but you need to be prepared to get directly involved in this. You can't just be someone who provides evidence and then walks away." Sterling looked out the window once more, observing the Victorian house where an innocent child suffered in silence. His profits in Bitcoin, his dividends, all his wealth seemed insignificant compared to the responsibility he was taking on. But for the first time in years, he felt that he was doing something truly important. "I'm prepared," he said, his voice firm despite the fear he felt. "I'll do whatever it takes to get that girl out of there. I owe it to her mother's memory, and I owe it to myself." Chapter 5. As Sterling and his lawyer planned the intervention across the street, Juniper lived through another day of absolute terror. The aunt had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more whiskey in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that the child had made on the kitchen wall during the early morning, using a piece of charcoal that she had hidden under a loose board. "How many times do I need to tell you not to dirty the walls?" shouted the woman, grabbing the girl by the arm with enough force to leave purple marks. "You are a pest, a curse on this house. Everything you touch turns to disgrace." The girl tried to explain herself, to say that she had dreamed of her mother and that the drawings made her feel less alone during the dark and cold nights. But the words were lost in desperate sobs that only increased the aunt's fury. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why she was hated so intensely, why each day brought new pain for no apparent reason. "You're going to be locked in the room until I decide what to do with you," continued the aunt, pushing the child through the narrow hallway of the Victorian house. "And if I hear even a single noise, you'll experience a punishment you've never experienced before." The room where the girl was locked was small and stuffy, with only a high window that she couldn't reach even by climbing on the old bed. The air was stale and hot, making breathing difficult. There, she huddled in the darkest corner and began to sing her mother's song softly, the melody being her only source of comfort in a world that seemed to have completely forgotten that she existed. It was this song that the retired schoolteacher heard when she passed by the house on her way to the market. She had spent the whole night thinking about the conversation with the girl in the yard, the marks she had seen on the child's arms, the atmosphere of fear that permeated that house like a dark and oppressive cloud. The teacher stopped in front of the gate and listened attentively. The girl's voice was weak, but laden with a sadness that made the educator's heart break into 1,000 pieces. At that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to the market, she went directly to the center of town, where the small office of Child Protective Services was located. "I need to talk about a very serious situation," said the teacher, entering the office without ceremony. She knew the caseworker in charge well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to the protection of vulnerable children after graduating in social work. The caseworker looked up from the papers she was analyzing. "Ms. Ainsworth, it's good to see you. What brings you here today?" Her expression changed immediately when she noticed the seriousness on the experienced educator's face. "A child in danger, my neighbor. I'm absolutely sure she's being abused," said the teacher, her voice firm despite the emotion she was trying to control. The caseworker straightened up in her chair, her expression becoming immediately serious and professional. During her 5 years working with child protection, she had learned to recognize when a complaint was serious and urgent. And she had known the teacher long enough to know that she would not make frivolous or unfounded accusations. "Tell me everything," said the caseworker, picking up a complaint form and preparing to write down every important detail. As the teacher reported her observations meticulously across town, the Millionaire's lawyer was in a similar meeting at the district attorney's office. The prosecutor responsible for child abuse cases listened attentively while he presented the evidence collected by his client. "This is very compelling evidence," said the prosecutor, examining the videos on the cell phone with a grave expression. I can clearly see signs of systematic violence. I'll order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." "How long will that take?" asked the lawyer, worried about every minute that passed while the girl continued to suffer. "With this clear evidence, we can act today," replied the prosecutor, picking up the phone. "I'll contact Child Protective Services now to coordinate the operation." That was how, by an extraordinary coincidence, two simultaneous complaints reached Child Protective Services on the same morning. The caseworker was finishing writing down the teacher's report when her phone rang urgently. "Child Protective Services, how can I help you?" she answered. "This is the prosecutor responsible for child protection. I need you to make an urgent intervention in a house on Main Street in the historic town. We have evidence of serious child abuse," said the official voice on the other end of the line. The caseworker paused, the pen suspended over the paper. "Is it, by any chance, the yellow Victorian house with blue windows?" "Exactly. How did you know?" asked the prosecutor, surprised. "I just received a complaint about the same house," replied the caseworker, looking at the teacher with a mixture of surprise and confirmation. "Two independent sources reporting the same situation. This confirms the extreme gravity of what's happening." At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being set up with military precision. The caseworker, accompanied by 2 experienced social workers and a bailiff, was heading to the Victorian house. The teacher had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children to help with the delicate approach that would be necessary. Sterling watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. Finally, after days of torturous paralysis, he had managed to act in a concrete way. His wealth, his investments, all his riches seemed insignificant compared to the importance of that moment. His lawyer was beside him, both witnessing the moment that would change the girl's life forever. "You did the right thing," said the professional, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder in a comforting way. "I hope it's not too late," replied the millionaire, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the Victorian house. "I hope we can still save what's left of her childhood." In the house, the aunt had gone out to buy whiskey at the local bar, leaving the girl locked in the stuffy room, as she always did. The child continued to sing softly, unaware that her life was about to change in a radical and definitive way. When the caseworker knocked on the door of the Victorian house and received no answer after several minutes, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What the team found inside surpassed even their worst professional expectations. A dirty and completely neglected house, a strong smell of alcohol impregnated in the walls, obvious signs of neglect in all the rooms, and an atmosphere of abandonment that made the heart ache. It was the teacher who first heard the weak voice coming from the room in the back. "There's someone here," she said, guiding the team through the dark hallway. "It's her. It's the girl." When they opened the door of the room and found the child huddled in the corner, singing her sad song as a mantra of survival, everyone present felt a pang in their heart that they would never forget. The girl looked up with big and frightened eyes, not understanding who those people were or what they wanted from her. But for the first time in months, there was hope shining on the horizon of her dark life. Mama, Chapter 6. "Hi, honey," said the caseworker in a soft voice, crouching down to be at the height of the terrified child. "My name is Bethany. We've come to help you. You don't need to be afraid of us." The girl looked at the teacher, recognizing the gentle lady who had talked to her in the yard. A glimmer of hope shone in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by the fear that had become her dominant emotion in recent months. "Auntie will be mad," she whispered, her voice so low that it could barely be heard. "She always gets very mad when people come here." "You don't need to worry about that now," said the teacher, reaching out to the girl with infinite kindness. "We're going to get out of here, okay? We're going to a place where you'll be safe." The girl's departure from the Victorian house was a moment that would be etched in the memory of everyone present forever. The child held the teacher's hand firmly, her steps small and hesitant as she crossed the door that had been her prison for so many months of suffering. Her big eyes scanned the streets of the historic town as if she were seeing the world for the first time after a long nightmare. "Where are we going, Grandma?" asked the girl, using again the affectionate way she had given the teacher. There was a fragile trust in her voice, as if she were testing whether it was safe to believe that good things could happen. "To a safe place, honey," replied the teacher, squeezing the child's small hand gently. "A place where no one will hurt you ever again. I promise you that with all my heart." The caseworker coordinated the operation with professional efficiency, but her heart broke as she observed the physical and emotional state of the girl. The child was visibly malnourished. Her clothes were inadequate and dirty, and the burn marks on her arms told a story of systematic suffering that no child should know. Across the street, Sterling watched the scene through his window, a mixture of relief and anxiety consuming his chest like an emotional storm. Finally, after days of torturous inaction, he had managed to do something concrete to help. But now, a new concern haunted him. What would happen to the girl from that moment on? His lawyer, who remained by his side, noticed his friend's growing tension. "The important thing is that she's safe now," he said, trying to reassure him. "We'll solve the rest step by step, with calm and responsibility." "But where are they going to take her?" asked Sterling, seeing the small entourage moving away down the cobblestone street. His accumulated fortune could solve many practical problems, but he didn't know how to navigate the emotional complexities of the situation. "Probably to a foster family while they investigate the case completely. It's the standard procedure in situations like this," explained the lawyer. At that moment, the teacher turned and looked directly at the window where the millionaire was watching. Their eyes met for an instant, charged with meaning, and the educator gave a discreet nod, as if she knew intuitively that he had been a fundamental part of that rescue operation. Meanwhile, in the local bar, the aunt finished her third shot of cheap whiskey when she saw unusual movement on her street through the establishment's clouded window. Her blood ran cold as she recognized official uniforms and people who clearly didn't belong in that quiet neighborhood of the historic town. "What the hell is going on there?" she muttered, staggering up from the table where she had spent the last dollars she had. The alcohol had dulled her reflexes, but not enough to prevent her from realizing that something was very wrong. The bar owner followed her gaze through the dirty window. "Looks like you got the law at your house. You're not in trouble with the cops, are you?" The aunt didn't answer. She threw some dirty coins on the table and ran out of the bar, tripping on the uneven stones of the sidewalk. Her heart beat erratically, not only from the alcohol, but from the growing terror that her actions had finally been discovered and that she would now have to face the consequences. When she arrived at her house, she found the door open and two social workers making detailed notes on the deplorable conditions of the property. The caseworker was waiting for her in the living room, her expression serious and completely professional, without showing any personal emotion. "Are you responsible for the child?" asked the caseworker, although she already knew the answer. "What are you doing in my house? Where's the girl?" The aunt tried to appear indignant, but her voice trembled visibly, betraying the fear she felt. The alcohol on her breath was noticeable meters away. "The child is under the protection of the state," replied the caseworker with absolute firmness. "We have received serious complaints of abuse, and we have substantial evidence of systematic child abuse." "That's a lie. I take good care of my niece. Who made these false accusations?" shouted the aunt, but her words sounded hollow even to herself. She knew exactly what she had done. She knew that there was no justification for her actions. The caseworker showed her the official documents with the court seal. "Ma'am, the child has multiple injuries consistent with intentional burns, as well as obvious signs of malnutrition and severe neglect. We have recordings of the episodes of violence and witnesses who witnessed the girl's suffering." The aunt paled as if she had seen a ghost. Recordings, witnesses. She looked instinctively at the kitchen window, realizing for the first time that it was perfectly visible from the building across the street. She had always tortured the girl in that place, without worrying about who might be watching, without imagining that anyone would care enough to document her crimes. She's a difficult child. She tried to justify herself desperately, but her words sounded weak and pathetic. Sometimes I needed to be firmer, but I never hurt her on purpose. It was just normal discipline. "Ma'am, the situation is extremely serious," replied the caseworker, maintaining a professional tone despite the outrage she felt. "The child will be temporarily placed in foster care while the case is fully investigated. You will have the right to an attorney, and you can contest the charges through the appropriate legal channels." Meanwhile, the girl was being taken for an emergency medical consultation at the small-town hospital. The local pediatrician was completely shocked to examine the child. In his 20 years of profession, he had seen cases of child abuse, but the systematization of the injuries on the girl was particularly disturbing and cruel. "These burns are all intentional," he explained to the caseworker after the detailed examination. "They all have the same pattern, suggesting repeated use of the same heated object. In addition, the child is significantly underweight for her age." "How long will she need to recover physically?" asked the caseworker, taking careful notes. "The burns will heal with proper medical care," replied the doctor. "But the psychological trauma, that will take much longer to heal. Perhaps years of specialized follow-up." The girl, wearing clean hospital pajamas, was sitting on a bed in the pediatrics ward, observing everything around her with a mixture of fear and fascination. It was the first time in months that she had been in a truly clean and safe environment, where people spoke gently and no one shouted. The teacher had remained with her throughout the medical examination, offering herself as a family support figure. "Grandma, can I stay with you?" asked the girl, holding the educator's hand tightly. "We'll see what's possible, honey," replied the teacher, deeply moved by the trust that the child placed in her. "But I promise I won't leave you alone ever again." The caseworker, observing the interaction between the two, began to form an idea that could solve, at least temporarily, the issue of the girl's care. The teacher was a respected person in the community, with vast experience in early childhood education, and clearly the child felt safe with her. That afternoon, while the girl rested in the hospital under specialized medical care, an important meeting was taking place at the Office of Child Protective Services. Present were the caseworker, the teacher, the millionaire's lawyer, and, to everyone's surprise, the millionaire himself, who had decided to get personally involved in the situation. Chapter 7. "Sir, I understand that you knew the girl's mother?" said the caseworker, consulting her notes carefully. There was something about the millionaire's presence that intrigued her. It was rare to see someone of his social standing getting directly involved in cases like that. "She worked for my company for 3 years, confirmed Sterling, his voice laden with an emotion he struggled to control. His leading man features contrasted with the tortured expression that took over his face whenever he spoke about his former employee. "She was an exemplary woman and a dedicated mother. If I had known what was happening with her daughter—" "The important thing is that now we know," interrupted Miss Ainsworth firmly. "The question is, what do we do from now on? This child needs stability, love, and specialized care. She can't be tossed from one place to another." The caseworker turned directly to the teacher. "Ms. Ainsworth, would you be willing to become a temporary foster family for the girl? Considering that she has already established an emotional bond with you." Ms. Ainsworth didn't hesitate for even a second. "Of course, I have experience with children. My house is suitable and, well, I think the girl and I have already chosen each other." There were tears in her eyes as she spoke, moved by the possibility of helping in a concrete way. The lawyer spoke on behalf of his client. "My client would like to contribute financially to the child's care." He feels responsible, considering his connection with the girl's mother and the fact that he didn't notice the signs that she needed help years ago. Sterling nodded, his determination growing with each moment. I want to ensure that the girl has access to the best medical and psychological care available. I would also like to get to know her better, if that's appropriate. I feel I owe it to her mother's memory. His investments in stocks and Bitcoin had generated enough income to sustain not only his luxurious lifestyle, but also to provide the child with everything she needed to recover physically and emotionally. The caseworker made careful notes in her report. We will proceed as follows. The girl will temporarily stay with Ms. Ainsworth while we do a complete assessment of the family situation. You will be able to contribute to the costs and, if you wish, establish a gradual relationship with the child, always supervised and with a focus on her well-being. When the meeting ended, Sterling felt relieved to finally have a concrete way to help. But he was also nervous about the prospect of personally meeting his former employee's daughter. What kind of connection could they form? And mainly, would he be able to overcome his own guilt to become a positive presence in the child's life? 2 weeks passed, and the girl had begun a new life in the welcoming home of Ms. Ainsworth. It was a simple but loving house, with flower gardens and a yard where she could finally play without fear. The teacher had transformed the guest room into a special space for the child, with walls painted light blue and drawings of colorful birds. No more the sad and black birds that she drew during the time of suffering. The first week had been difficult. The girl woke up every night screaming, reliving the traumas in terrible nightmares. But gradually, with infinite patience and much love, the teacher managed to show the child that she was now truly safe. "Good morning, my little flower," said Miss Ainsworth every morning, using a gentle tone that made the girl's eyes fill with tears. Not of pain, but of an emotion she had almost forgotten existed, the feeling of being loved. On the third day in the new house, something extraordinary happened. The girl was in the teacher's yard, watching a hummingbird visiting the red flowers in the garden, when she began to hum her mother's song softly. But this time, for the first time in months, her voice was not muffled by fear. The teacher, who was watering the nearby plants, stopped to listen carefully. It was a beautiful melody, full of longing, but also of hope being reborn. When the girl finished, she looked at the educator with an almost surprised expression on herself. "My mother sang this song," she said, her voice still weak but firmer than before. It was the first time she had spoken spontaneously about her mother since the rescue. "She was a mother who loved you very much," replied Miss Ainsworth, crouching down next to the child, "and I'm sure she would be very happy to know that you are safe now." It was at that moment that Sterling appeared at the gate. He had been gathering the courage to make that visit for 3 days, always finding an excuse to postpone it. His lawyer had scheduled the meeting with the teacher, explaining that it would be important for the child's healing process to meet people who had loved her mother. The girl hid behind Miss Ainsworth when she saw the tall and well-dressed man approaching. Despite his gentle appearance, she was still afraid of unknown men, a natural reaction after everything she had been through. Sterling stopped a few feet away, noticing the fear in the child's eyes. "Hi, little one," he said softly, crouching down to get closer to her height. "My name is... well, you can call me Uncle. I knew your mommy." The girl's eyes widened as if she had seen something magical. It had been so long since anyone had spoken about her mother in a loving way that she had begun to wonder if her memories were real or just distant dreams. "You knew my mother?" she asked, timidly stepping out from behind the teacher. There was a childish curiosity in her voice that the educator had not heard for weeks. "Yes, I knew her. She worked with me, and she always talked about you with great affection. She said you were the most important thing in her life," replied the millionaire, feeling an intense emotion rise in his throat. The girl processed this information in silence for a few moments. Then, to everyone's surprise, she took a step towards the millionaire. "She sang a song to me," she said. "The teacher says that she loved me very much." "Your mother loved you more than anything in the world," confirmed Sterling, fighting back the tears that threatened to spring. "And she would be very proud to see how brave and strong you are." During the following weeks, Sterling began to visit the girl regularly, always accompanied by the teacher and always respecting the child's rhythm. He gradually became a familiar and comforting presence in her new life. His investments continued to generate enough passive income to cover all the costs of the girl's recovery, but he discovered that money was only a small part of what he could offer. It was during one of those visits that something happened that changed everything forever. The girl was playing in the yard with some toys that Sterling had brought, not expensive or extravagant toys, but simple things like crayons and paper which she used to draw her favorite birds. "Uncle," she said, she had begun to call him that spontaneously, "can you tell me more things about my mother?" Sterling sat on the ground next to her, something he had never imagined doing before meeting her. His elegant posture of a successful man had given way to a simplicity that he didn't know he possessed. "Sure, your mother was very intelligent. She organized all the important papers in my company and never made mistakes. And whenever she talked about you, her whole face lit up with happiness." "Was she pretty?" asked the girl, drawing what appeared to be a woman next to a colorful bird. "She was very pretty. And she had a smile just like yours when you're happy," he replied, watching how the child smiled shyly upon hearing those words. The girl smiled more widely, and Sterling realized that it was the first time he had seen that child truly happy. The smile lit up her whole little face, transforming her completely and showing the innocent beauty that suffering had hidden. Chapter 8. "Uncle," said the girl suddenly, with the cruel innocence that only children possess, "can you be my daddy now?" The question hit Sterling like a lightning bolt in a clear sky. He looked at Ms. Ainsworth, who was watching the scene with tears in her eyes, and then at the child, who stared at him with a hope so pure that it made his heart break and recompose at the same time. All his fortune seemed insignificant in the face of that simple question. "Little one, honey," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I can't be your daddy because you already had a daddy who loved you very much. But I can be someone who takes care of you, who protects you, and who will always be here when you need me." The girl considered this for a moment, her 4-year-old mind processing complex concepts of family and love. "Like a real uncle." "Exactly like a real uncle," he confirmed, feeling a responsibility he had never experienced before. That night, after the girl fell asleep, Miss Ainsworth and Sterling talked at length on the porch of the simple house. The educator had noticed the transformation, not only in the child, but also in the businessman. He had traded his formal suits for more casual clothes during the visits. His laughter had become more frequent, and she could see that taking care of the girl was healing something deep inside him. "She's recovering well," said the teacher, watching the stars shining over the historic town. "But she still has nightmares some nights. She wakes up crying and calling for her mother." "It's understandable after everything she's been through," replied Sterling. "Do you think we should seek specialized psychological help for her?" "I'm already arranging that. I know an excellent child psychologist in the capital. She can come here a few times a week to work on specific traumas." "I'll pay all the costs," said Sterling immediately. His income from investments more than enough to cover any treatment needed. "Can I ask you something?" said Miss Ainsworth after a moment of silence. "Sure. Why do you feel so responsible for this child? I know you knew her mother, but there's something more, isn't there?" Sterling was silent for a long time, looking at the mountains that surrounded the town. Finally, he spoke. "When the girl's mother resigned, I was going through a very difficult period in my personal life. I was focused only on my own problems, on my investments, on the growth of my wealth. He paused, his voice choked with the emotion he was trying to control. She tried to talk to me a few times. She seemed worried about something important, but I was so absorbed in my own issues that I didn't pay attention. If I had been a better person, maybe she would have felt comfortable telling me about her difficulties. "You can't blame yourself for that," said Ms. Ainsworth softly, placing her hand on his shoulder in a maternal way. "I can, and I'll carry that guilt forever," he replied. "But now I have a chance to do something right, to honor her memory by taking care of the daughter she loved so much." That night, Sterling made a decision that would change not only his life, but also the girl's future. He would contact his lawyer the next morning to discuss the possibility of becoming officially responsible for the child, along with Ms. Ainsworth. 2 weeks later, life had found an almost perfect rhythm in the teacher's house. The girl had adapted to the routine of medical care, psychological therapy, and above all, to the unconditional love she received. Her physical wounds were healing well, and slowly her true personality began to emerge from the trauma. But the tranquility was interrupted by a discovery that no one expected. The lawyer arrived one morning with a worried expression, bringing news that would change everything again. "You need to know what I discovered about the girl's aunt," he said, spreading documents on the living room table. "She's not just a woman with alcoholism problems. There's something much more serious in her history." "What do you mean?" asked Sterling, feeling a chill in his stomach. "She was fired from her public job, not only for absences, but for suspected embezzlement of funds intended for children's social programs. She was never formally charged because the evidence disappeared mysteriously, but internal records show an ongoing investigation." Ms. Ainsworth paled. "She was stealing money intended to help children?" "Apparently, yes. And there's more," continued the lawyer, his expression becoming even darker. "I found medical records showing that the girl's mother was hospitalized several times in the months before her death, always with injuries that doctors considered suspicious, but she never wanted to talk about how they happened." A heavy silence took over the room. Sterling got up and walked to the window, processing the devastating information. "You're saying that the aunt was also abusing the girl's mother?" "It's very likely. And that would explain why the mother left town so abruptly. She wasn't just running from financial problems, she was running from her own sister who mistreated her." Ms. Ainsworth covered her face with her hands, horrified. "My God! And she left her daughter with that woman, why?" "Probably had no choice," replied the lawyer. "The mother was sick, had no resources, had nowhere to go. The aunt must have taken advantage of her sister's desperate situation to take control." At that moment, the door opened, and the caseworker from Child Protective Services entered with an urgent expression on her face. "Sorry to interrupt, but I have important news about the case." "What happened?" asked Ms. Ainsworth, immediately alert. "The girl's aunt was arrested last night. Public intoxication and assault on a storekeeper in the town center." "But that's not all." The caseworker paused, taking a deep breath. "During the arrest, she made some very disturbing statements about the child." "What kind of statements?" asked Sterling, feeling the anger growing in his chest. "She said that the girl deserved everything she got, and that if she could, she would do worse. The police chief considered the statements as further evidence that she poses a continuing danger to any child." The lawyer perked up for the first time that dark morning. "This is excellent for our case. I'll use those statements as evidence that she is not psychologically fit to care for a child." "There's something else," continued the caseworker. "The lawyer who was representing her abandoned the case. Apparently, she couldn't pay the fees and, well, the statements she made didn't help her legal cause. While the adults discussed complex legal issues, the girl was living her happiest days since she could remember. That morning, she had helped Miss Ainsworth make sugar cookies, her little hands covered in flour while she laughed at something the educator had said. It was a sound that Sterling never tired of hearing, the pure and crystal-clear laughter of a truly happy child. "Uncle!" cried the girl when she saw him arriving for lunch, running to hug him enthusiastically. "I made cookies for you." "Really? And how did you know I was hungry?" he joked, picking her up and feeling how she had gained healthy weight in recent weeks. "Because you always get hungry when you come here," she replied, giggling in a way that melted the hearts of everyone present. During lunch, the girl excitedly told about her day, about the birds she had seen in the yard, about the storybook that Miss Ainsworth had read to her. It was hard to believe that that vibrant and talkative child was the same silent and terrified girl they had rescued weeks ago. "Little one," said Sterling carefully, "Grandma Ainsworth and I want to talk to you about something very important." "What is it?" she asked, stopping eating and paying full attention. "Would you like to live with Grandma Ainsworth forever? And I would continue visiting every day, taking care of you, being your real uncle forever." The girl's eyes widened, as if she had heard the best news of her life. "Forever? Really?" "Forever," confirmed the teacher, holding the child's small hand. "If you want, of course. This would be your real home, and we would be your family." The girl was quiet for a moment, processing the information with the seriousness that only a child who has been through trauma can demonstrate. Then, to the adult's surprise, she smiled, a huge and radiant smile that lit up the whole room. "Then I can stay with you forever? And will no one ever hurt me again?" "Never again," promised Sterling, his voice firm as a rock. "I promise you will always be safe with us. This is my commitment to you and to your mother's memory." Chapter 9. The girl got up from her chair and hugged first the teacher, then the millionaire, with a surprising strength for someone so small. "I love you," she said, words that made the two adults deeply moved, feeling that they had finally found a purpose, greater than any wealth or material achievement. That afternoon, something unexpected happened that would test the newly won security. The girl was playing in the yard when she saw an unknown man standing on the sidewalk, watching the house with suspicious attention. She ran inside, looking for Miss Ainsworth with her heart pounding in fear. "Grandma, there's a man outside looking at our house," she said, clearly frightened, her small hands trembling slightly. The trauma was still very close to the surface, and any strange situation made her relive the terror she had experienced. The teacher went to the window and saw a middle-aged man, thin and poorly dressed, standing across the street. Something in his posture and the way he watched the house made her feel deeply uncomfortable. There was a hostility in his body language that she immediately recognized. "Little one, go to your room to play, okay?" she said, picking up the phone urgently. "I'm going to call Uncle." Miss Ainsworth immediately called Sterling, who was on his way to a business meeting to discuss his investments in stocks. "There's a strange man watching the house." The girl was very scared about the situation. "I'm going there now," he replied, mentally cancelling all his appointments for the day. Nothing was more important than the safety of the child who had become the center of his life. When Sterling arrived, the man was still there, now smoking a cigarette and clearly waiting for something. The businessman got out of the car and headed directly to the stranger, his confident posture contrasting with the other's scruffy appearance. "Can I help you with something?" asked Sterling, his tone polite but firm, making it clear that he would not tolerate any threat. The man turned, revealing a face marked by alcohol and a clearly hostile expression. "You must be the rich guy who's paying for all this," he said with disdain, spitting on the ground. "Do you think that because you have money you can do whatever you want?" "Who are you?" asked Sterling, keeping his distance but remaining alert for any aggressive movement. "I'm the cousin of the woman you destroyed, and I came to see where the girl who ruined my family's life is," replied the man, his voice laden with alcohol and resentment. "The girl didn't ruin anyone's life," replied Sterling, feeling the anger growing in his chest, "and I suggest you leave this property immediately." "Oh, yeah? And who's going to make me leave?" Do you think that because you accumulated a fortune investing in Bitcoin and stocks you can intimidate anyone? At that moment, Miss Ainsworth came out of the house with the phone in her hand, showing determination despite her age. "I've already called the police," she announced. "They're on their way and have been informed about the situation." The aunt's cousin made a face of contempt and walked away slowly, but not before casting a threatening look at the house. "This isn't over," he muttered before disappearing down the street, leaving a heavy atmosphere of tension. When the police arrived, they took the statement and promised to keep surveillance on the area. But the incident left everyone shaken, especially because it showed that the aunt's family had not accepted the situation and could pose a continuing threat. That night, the girl had her first nightmare in 2 weeks. She woke up crying, calling for the teacher with desperation. When the educator ran to her room, she found the child trembling under the covers, reliving fears they thought had been overcome. "It was just a bad dream, honey," consoled Miss Ainsworth, hugging her tightly. "You're safe here with me. I dreamed that Auntie came back to get me," sobbed the girl, her tears wetting her pajamas, "and that the bad man from today helped her." "That's never going to happen," promised Miss Ainsworth, but internally she worried. "We're not going to let anyone hurt you again. Do you really promise?" "I promise with all my heart." But while consoling the girl, the teacher couldn't help but worry about what else might come. The cousin's appearance had made it clear that the battle for security was far from over. In the following days, a constant tension hung over the house like a dark cloud. The cousin had returned twice more, always keeping enough distance to avoid being considered trespassing, but clearly intimidating. The millionaire had hired a discreet security guard to watch the area, using some of his passive income to ensure protection. But the sense of threat remained. Juniper, with her childlike sensitivity, heightened by past trauma, sensed that something was wrong. Her smiles became less frequent, and she began to cling more to Eleanor, especially when they left the house for medical appointments or activities. "Grandma, why does that man keep looking at our house?" she asked one morning while they were having breakfast together. Eleanor chose her words carefully. "Some people get confused when other people are happy, sweetie, but you don't need to worry. We're taking care of everything." "Is Sterling taking care of it too?" "Of course he is. We're both always taking care of you, always protecting our family." That afternoon, while Juniper was playing in the yard under Eleanor's watchful eye, Sterling arrived with his lawyer, Franklin, and a woman she didn't know. The woman was elegant, middle-aged, with a gentle but professional smile that inspired confidence. "Juniper," Sterling called, "come and meet someone special. This is Dr. Mallory, who works with children and has come to talk to us about our plans for the future." Juniper approached timidly. She had learned to trust the people Sterling and Eleanor introduced to her, but she still maintained a natural caution with strangers, especially after the incident with the aunt's cousin. "Hi, honey," said Dr. Mallory, crouching down to get to the child's height. "Can I ask you a few questions?" "They're easy questions, just to get to know you better." "Okay," Juniper replied, looking at Eleanor for encouragement. "Do you like living here with Grandma Eleanor?" "I like it a lot. She makes me sugar cookies and reads me stories. And she never yells at me." "And what do you think of Sterling?" "He's very nice. He brought me toys and always plays with me. And he knew my mom and says nice things about her." Dr. Mallory smiled genuinely. "Do you feel safe here?" "Yes, I do. Nobody hurts me here. It's different than before." The conversation continued for a few minutes, with simple questions that allowed the professional to assess Juniper's emotional well-being and her adjustment to her new home. When it was over, she joined the adults in the living room for a more serious conversation. "From my preliminary assessment," said Dr. Mallory, "Juniper is visibly well-adjusted and happy in this environment. You've created a truly loving home for her." "What about the legal proceedings?" asked Sterling, anxious to formalize the situation. "Based on what I've observed and the reports I've received, I believe you have a solid foundation for the permanent custody process. The child clearly sees you as family. How long will this take? Asked Eleanor. Normally, cases like this take between 6 months and a year. But considering the special circumstances and the documented history of abuse, I can expedite the process. Eleanor sighed in relief. What about the aunt's cousin? Can he try anything legally? He has a minor but significant criminal record, Dr. Mallory replied, mostly related to alcohol and aggressive behavior. I don't think he has a legal basis to contest, but I'll issue a preventative restraining order. That night, after Juniper finally fell asleep, Sterling stayed for dinner with Eleanor. It was something that had become routine in recent weeks, the two discussing Juniper's care, planning her future, and gradually developing a partnership that went beyond shared responsibility. "Do you miss the life you had before?" Eleanor asked as they washed the dishes together. "The freedom, the tranquility, your investments being your only concern." Sterling thought for a moment, drying a plate carefully. "You know, I thought I had a full life before. Work, money, assets growing. But now I realize I was just existing. Juniper gave me a purpose I didn't even know I needed. And aren't you scared of all this emotional responsibility?" "I am," he admitted, "but it's a different kind of fear than I felt before. Before, I was afraid of getting involved, of committing, of suffering again. Now I'm afraid of not being good enough for her, of failing when she needs me." "That means you've completely committed yourself," Eleanor observed with a warm smile. Chapter 10. 2 days later, the situation took a violent turn that no one had foreseen. Juniper was playing in the yard when she saw the aunt's cousin approaching the gate again. This time, however, he wasn't just watching. He was clearly heading to the house with aggressive determination. "Grandma!" Juniper screamed, running into the house in panic. "The bad man is coming again!" Eleanor immediately called the security guard Sterling had hired, but the cousin was already banging on the door with excessive force, making the whole house shake. "Open this door," he shouted, clearly drunk. "I want to talk to you about that girl. She belongs to our family." "Go away," Eleanor replied through the locked door, holding Juniper, who was trembling with terror. "You have a restraining order." "I'm not leaving until we talk. You can't steal a child from our family just because you have money," he continued shouting, his voice echoing through the quiet street. At that moment, they heard the sound of glass breaking. The cousin had broken a side window of the house and was trying to force his way in, completely out of control. It was at this critical moment that Sterling arrived, having been alerted by the security guard. He found the cousin half inside the house, shouting about family rights and threatening to take Juniper by force, regardless of what anyone said. "Get out of our house now," Sterling ordered, positioning himself between the intruder and Juniper, who was crying desperately in Eleanor's arms. "Our house? This is the house of the girl who destroyed my family," the cousin shouted, staggering dangerously. "The only person who destroyed anything here was your cousin, torturing an innocent child," Sterling replied, his voice filled with controlled fury. The cousin advanced towards Sterling with clenched fists, but at that moment the security guard and 2 police officers arrived simultaneously. The situation was quickly controlled, with the intruder being arrested for trespassing and violating a court order. But the emotional damage was done. Juniper had witnessed another scene of violence, and all the progress of recent weeks seemed threatened. She curled up in the corner of the room, trembling and crying, refusing to talk to anyone. "Juniper, my darling," Eleanor tried, approaching slowly. "It's okay now. The bad man is gone and won't come back." "He'll be back," Juniper sobbed. "They always come back, like my aunt always came back when I thought I was safe." Sterling knelt beside her, his heart breaking as he saw the child again consumed by fear. "Juniper, look at me. That man won't bother you again. I promise." "You can't promise that," she said, her voice small but filled with a painful wisdom that no child should possess. "Nobody can promise that bad people won't come back." It was a moment of brutal clarity for both adults. They realized that despite all the love and care they offered, Juniper would forever carry the scars of the trauma she had experienced. Healing would be a much longer and more complex process than they had imagined. That night, the child psychologist made an emergency visit. After talking to Juniper for an hour, she met with Sterling and Eleanor for a worrying assessment. Today's incident was a powerful trigger, she explained with professional seriousness. The child relived the fear and sense of powerlessness she felt with the aunt. It will take some considerable time for her to feel safe again. "What can we do?" asked Eleanor, clearly shaken by the setback. "Keep doing what you're doing. Love, patience, absolute consistency, and maybe it's time to consider a complete change of address." Sterling raised his head, intrigued. Change. This house, however welcoming it is still too close to the places where Juniper suffered. A move to a completely new environment could help her build genuinely safe memories, away from any traumatic memories. That night, after Juniper finally fell asleep in Eleanor's room, she had refused to sleep alone after the incident. The two adults talked late into the night about this radical possibility. "Would you sell this house?" Sterling asked, observing the place that had become home for Juniper. "If it's the best thing for her, yes," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "This house is just a place. Our family is what really matters for her future." "Our family," Sterling repeated, deeply liking the sound of the words. "Then let's look for a new home, a place where she can grow without any shadow of the past." A week later, the search for a new house became a joint project that brought a renewed energy to the family that was forming. Sterling had suggested buying a larger property on the outskirts of Willow Creek, where Juniper could have more space to play and they would be far from the painful memories of downtown. "I want you to see some options," he said to Eleanor one morning, spreading real estate flyers on the kitchen table. His investments in gold and funds had yielded enough to buy any property they chose. Juniper, who was having breakfast, became interested in the colorful images. "Sterling, are we going to live in a new house?" "If you want to, yes. A house where you can have your own special room, a large yard to play in, and where nobody from the past can bother us." Juniper's eyes sparkled with cautious curiosity. "Can I choose the color of my room?" "You can choose everything," Eleanor replied, hugging the child. "Color of the walls, furniture, toys. It will be your special corner in the world." The following weekend, the three went to see the houses that Sterling had pre-selected using his available capital. The first was too big, cold, and impersonal. The second had a beautiful garden, but it was too close to the main road, which brought security concerns. It was in the third house that something magical happened. It was a two-story house, painted light yellow with blue trim, surrounded by a flower garden where colorful butterflies danced among the flowers. It had a large porch in the front and, in the back, a spacious yard with a century-old tree that offered generous shade. "Wow," Juniper whispered when they got out of the car. "It's like the houses in my pretty drawings." The realtor, a friendly lady, opened the door and invited them in. The interior was welcoming, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. It had 3 bedrooms upstairs, a large living room, a spacious kitchen and, to Juniper's delight, a small library with built-in shelves. "Can I live here right now?" Juniper asked, running from room to room with an excitement she hadn't shown in a long time. "If you like it," Sterling replied, watching with emotion as Juniper explored every corner of the house with childlike curiosity. "I like it. I like it a lot," she exclaimed, stopping in front of a window overlooking the garden. "Look how many birds!" In fact, there were several birds in the garden, robins, blue jays, cardinals, creating a natural symphony that enchanted everyone. Juniper was mesmerized watching the free birds, without cages, flying from branch to branch. Eleanor approached Sterling. "This is the right house," she said quietly. "You can feel the positive energy of the place." It's perfect for her to start a new life. I can feel it, he agreed, already visualizing Juniper playing safely in that garden. I'm going to make an offer today. 3 weeks later, while the purchase papers were being finalized using a substantial portion of Sterling's assets, something unexpected happened that would change everything once again. Franklin called urgently on a Thursday morning. I need you to come to my office immediately. Bring Eleanor too. It's about Juniper, and it's extremely urgent. What happened? Asked Sterling, his heart racing. I prefer to explain in person. And maybe it's best to leave Juniper with someone you trust today. This conversation may be very difficult. Eleanor left Juniper with a trusted neighbor and went with Sterling to the lawyer's office. When they arrived, they found Bethany from Child Protective Services also present, with an expression that mixed surprise and concern. Chapter 11. What's going on? Asked Eleanor, feeling a cold sensation in her stomach as she saw the serious expressions on everyone's faces. The lawyer took a deep breath, clearly struggling to find the right words. We've received information about Juniper's mother that changes everything. What kind of information? Sterling asked, his voice tense. Juniper's mother didn't pass away as we thought, Bethany said carefully, choosing each word. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor and Sterling exchanged glances, slowly processing what they had just heard, trying to understand the devastating implications of this revelation. What do you mean? Eleanor murmured, her voice almost inaudible. She's alive, the lawyer said directly. Juniper's mother is alive and has been in a psychiatric clinic in the state capital for 5 years. The revelation hit them both like an emotional tsunami. Sterling got up abruptly, walking to the window as he tried to process the information, while Eleanor covered her face with her hands, trying to control the emotion that was washing over her. That's impossible, Sterling said, his voice breaking. Juniper told us that her mother that she had passed away. That's what the aunt told Juniper, Bethany explained. The mother had a severe nervous breakdown after the constant mistreatment by her sister. She tried to hurt herself and was hospitalized for intensive treatment. The aunt assumed guardianship, claiming that her sister was incapacitated. And she never improved in all these years? Eleanor asked, tears streaming down her face. She's improving now, the lawyer said. Doctors say she's been asking about her daughter constantly in recent months. The treatment is finally working, and she's stable. My God, Sterling whispered, leaning on the windowsill. And now? What does this mean for Juniper? It means, Bethany said carefully, that the biological mother has a legal right to her daughter, if she's deemed fit by the doctors and the court. No, Eleanor said firmly, getting up with determination. Juniper has barely begun to recover. She's formed deep bonds with us. She can't be ripped away from all of this again. I completely understand your concern, Bethany said empathetically, but we have to consider what's best for the child in the long run. A child has a fundamental right to be with her biological mother. The lawyer spoke up, trying to find a solution. There are legal precedents for situations like this. We can argue that the sudden change would be detrimental to the child's emotional well-being, especially considering the trauma she's already faced. And the mother? Sterling asked, returning to his chair. Does she know we found her daughter? Not yet, Bethany replied. We wanted to talk to you first, understand the child's current situation. But she will have to be informed soon. It's her right as a mother. Sterling returned to his chair, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. How are we going to tell Juniper? She genuinely believes that her mother is no longer in this world. With great care and specialized psychological support, Bethany said. Perhaps we should consult the child psychologist before making any final decisions. That afternoon, an emergency meeting was arranged with the psychologist. She listened to the entire situation with professional attention, taking notes as she processed the complex implications for the child's well-being. This is an extremely delicate situation, she said after hearing all the details. Juniper genuinely believes that her mother is no longer in this world. Discovering that this isn't true will be a huge emotional shock. "How should we approach this with her?" asked Eleanor, clearly distressed. "Gradually. First, we need to prepare the child for the possibility of changes in her life. Then, carefully introduce the idea that her mother may be alive. And finally, if it's inevitable, prepare for a possible reunion." "What if the mother wants Juniper back immediately?" Sterling asked, his voice filled with fear. "Then we'll have to fight in court," the psychologist replied. "But based on what I've observed, the child is in a stable and loving environment. Any drastic change could be devastating to her emotional development." That night, Sterling and Eleanor returned home in silence, each lost in their own turbulent thoughts. Juniper was waiting for them with a drawing she had made at the neighbor's house, the new yellow house with 3 happy figures in front, her, Eleanor, and Sterling. "Look what I drew," she said excitedly, completely oblivious to the emotional storm that had taken over the adults' lives. "Our new family in the new house." Eleanor hugged Juniper extra tight, trying not to cry. "It's beautiful, my dear, very beautiful indeed." "When are we going to move?" Juniper asked, her eyes shining with excitement. "Soon," Sterling replied, his voice filled with an emotion that he struggled to control. "Very soon, sweetie." That night, after Juniper fell asleep, Sterling and Eleanor talked late into the night about the impossible situation they found themselves in. Their investments continued to generate dividends, their assets grew, but none of that mattered in the face of the possibility of losing the child they had learned to love as their own. "I can't lose her," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. "She's become my daughter in my heart. She is the family I never had." "Neither did I," Sterling replied, holding her hand in a gesture of mutual support. "But if the biological mother wants her daughter back, then we'll fight," Eleanor said, with renewed determination. "We'll fight for her, for the family we've built. She deserves stability, not another traumatic upheaval in her life." "You're right," Sterling agreed, feeling his own determination strengthen. "We'll use every resource necessary, financial, legal, emotional. We won't give up easily." It was a battle that neither of them had foreseen, but both knew they would do anything to protect the girl who had changed their lives forever. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would not let her suffer again without fighting with all the strength they possessed. In the next room, Juniper slept peacefully, dreaming of colorful birds and a yellow house where she felt safe. She didn't know that her life was about to change again, nor that 3 adults, 2 who loved her unconditionally and a mother who was finally recovering, would have to find a way to put her well-being above their own needs and desires. The following morning brought a call that would change everything once again. Bethany called early, her voice filled with urgency and concern. "Juniper's mother found out we found her daughter," she said. "And she's insisting on seeing her immediately. Doctors say she's stable enough for a supervised meeting." Sterling's heart skipped a beat. "But Juniper has barely begun to process the information that her mother may be alive. A meeting now would be too traumatic." "I completely agree," Bethany said, "but the mother is threatening to file a lawsuit if we don't allow the meeting. And unfortunately, she has legal rights over her daughter that we can't simply ignore." The psychologist spoke up during an emergency consultation. "If the meeting is inevitable, then let's at least do it in the most controlled way possible. Neutral environment, limited duration, and with all of us present to support the child." It was decided that the meeting would take place in the psychologist's office the following Saturday. The mother would be brought from the clinic, accompanied by a nurse and a psychiatrist, while Juniper would have the support of Eleanor, Sterling, and Bethany. During the days leading up to the meeting, Juniper oscillated between excitement and absolute terror. Sometimes she would draw figures of a woman she called Mommy. Other times she would hide under the bed crying uncontrollably. Chapter 12. "What if she doesn't like me anymore?" Juniper asked one night, her small hand squeezing the sheet tightly. "What if she thinks I grew up ugly or naughty?" "Your mom is going to think you're the most beautiful child in the world," Sterling replied, even though he himself was terrified of the possibilities of that encounter. His treasury and stock investments continued to generate profits, but all his fortune seemed useless in the face of the emotional complexity of the situation. On Saturday morning, Juniper woke up earlier than usual. She had chosen her prettiest dress, a yellow one with flowers that Eleanor had bought for her, and asked Eleanor to braid her hair in 2 pigtails. "I want to look pretty for Mommy," she said, looking at herself in the mirror with a mixture of anxiety and hope that broke the heart of anyone who watched her. The psychologist's office had been specially prepared for the meeting. Toys and books were scattered around the room to create a more relaxed atmosphere, and chairs had been arranged in a way that would not intimidate either mother or daughter. When the mother arrived, Sterling was shocked by her appearance. The woman he remembered as a cheerful and efficient employee had become a frail figure, too thin, with graying hair and eyes that reflected years of mental suffering. But when she saw Juniper, her expression transformed completely. "My little one," the mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My beautiful girl." Juniper hid behind Eleanor, watching the woman who was her mother, but also a stranger. The 4-year-old she remembered had grown, changed, formed deep bonds with other people during her forced absence. "Hi, Mommy," Juniper said timidly, her voice almost a whisper. "You've grown so much," said the mother, controlling the impulse to run to hug her daughter. "You're so pretty, so healthy. You look like a little princess." Gradually, with the careful mediation of the psychologist, mother and daughter began to talk. The mother said that she had been sick, that she thought of Juniper every day, that she deeply regretted leaving her daughter with the aunt. "I didn't know she was going to hurt you," said the mother, her voice broken by crying. "If I had known, I would never have left you with her. Never." "It's okay, Mommy," Juniper said, her childlike compassion speaking louder than any resentment. "Now I'm safe with Grandma Eleanor and Sterling, who knew you." It was at that moment that the reality of the situation hit the mother with full force. Her daughter had created a new family, people who clearly loved and cared for her. She looked at Eleanor and Sterling, seeing the genuine love in their eyes when they looked at the child. "You took good care of her," said the mother, addressing the two. "I can see that she is very loved by you." "Very loved," confirmed Eleanor, her voice choked with emotion. The meeting lasted 2 hours, enough time for mother and daughter to reconnect minimally, but not so much that it was overwhelming for either of them. When it was time for the mother to leave, she knelt in front of Juniper. "My dear, Mommy needs to go back to the place where she is healing. But I will think of you every day and work hard to get well." "Are you going to get better?" Juniper asked, her big eyes full of hope. "I'm going to try very hard. And when I'm completely well, we'll talk about our future, okay?" Juniper nodded, hugging her mother for the first time in 5 years. It was a brief hug, still hesitant, but full of possibilities and love that had remained dormant throughout that time of separation. After the mother left, Juniper was quiet for a long time. Finally, she looked at Eleanor and Sterling with a serious expression beyond her 4 years. "She seems very sad," the child said. "But I still want to stay with you. You are my family now." That night, while Juniper slept exhausted from the emotional encounter, Sterling and Eleanor received a call that would change everything once again. It was the psychologist, with news about a conversation she had had with the mother after the meeting. "Juniper's mother has made a very important decision," the psychologist said, "a decision that you need to hear carefully." The call left both in suspense for an entire night. The psychologist had asked to meet them the next day for a crucial conversation about the mother's decision, but had not given details over the phone. On Sunday morning, the two headed to the office while Juniper stayed once again with the trusted neighbor. The child had woken up talking about the meeting with her mother, mixing joy at having seen her with relief at still being with her chosen family. "She's still very sad," Juniper had commented during breakfast, "but I think she wants to get better for me." In the office, the psychologist greeted them with a serious but not somber expression. There was something in her eyes that suggested that the news would not be devastating. "The mother spent the night talking to me and the doctors at the clinic," she began. "The meeting with her daughter was a decisive moment for her, a turning point in her healing process." "Decisive how?" asked Eleanor, clasping her hands nervously. She realized that Juniper had built a new life, a family that truly loves her. And more importantly, she understood that forcing a change now would be extremely harmful to her daughter. Sterling leaned forward, barely able to believe what he was hearing. What exactly did she decide? "The mother will not claim immediate custody of Juniper," said the psychologist, her words falling like a blessing on the two adults. "She recognizes that she is not yet completely healed and that Juniper needs stability above all else." The relief that took over Eleanor was so intense that she began to cry copiously. Sterling held her hand, himself fighting against the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "But there are important conditions," continued the psychologist. "The mother wants to maintain regular contact with her daughter while she continues her treatment. She also wants to participate in important decisions about the child's education and future." "That's more than fair," Sterling said immediately. "She's the biological mother. She has that fundamental right." "And when she's completely healed?" asked Eleanor, still worried about the long-term future. "The mother was very clear about that," replied the psychologist. "She said that if one day she is completely well, she would like to have her daughter back. But not in an abrupt or traumatic way. It would be a gradual transition, very careful, and only if it was really the best thing for Juniper." "And how did Juniper react to this possibility when you talked?" asked Sterling. "We haven't talked to her about those details yet. I thought it best to hear your opinion first, understand how you feel about this solution." Eleanor dried her tears, trying to process all the information. "The important thing is that she's safe with us for now. And if one day the mother is really well, we'll face that situation when it comes." "There's something else," said the psychologist. "The mother made a special request. She would like you to consider moving closer to the state capital to make regular visits easier." Sterling and Eleanor exchanged glances. They had just bought the Yellow House, using a significant portion of his assets. But if it meant keeping Juniper and giving the biological mother a chance to gradually reconnect with her daughter, "We can seriously consider that," Sterling said. "My investment income is enough to sustain any necessary changes, and Eleanor can work as an educational consultant anywhere." When they returned home, they found Juniper playing in the yard with the neighbor, drawing more birds on a large sheet of paper. This time, the birds were colorful and cheerful, flying freely in a blue sky. "Hi, Grandma! Hi, Sterling!" she shouted, running to hug them enthusiastically. "I drew Mommy along with you." The drawing showed 4 figures now: Eleanor, Sterling, Juniper, and a long-haired woman who represented her mother. All were smiling, surrounded by the inevitable colorful birds that symbolized freedom and hope. "It's beautiful, my dear," said Eleanor, noting how the child had naturally included her biological mother in the concept of family. "Did you like seeing your mommy yesterday?" Sterling asked carefully. "I liked it, but she was very thin. I think she needs to eat Grandma's sugar cookies to get strong and healthy," Juniper replied, with the simplicity that only a child possesses. The innocence of the answer touched both adults deeply. Even at 4 years old, she understood intuitively that her mother needed care and time to recover completely. Chapter 13. That afternoon, the psychologist came to have dinner with them. She had become almost part of the family in the last few weeks of intensive treatment. During the meal, she carefully explained to Juniper that her mother would like to see her more often, but that she would continue to live with Eleanor and Sterling. "Can I see Mommy again?" Juniper asked, excited by the possibility. "Yes, you can. Maybe once a week, while she continues to heal at the clinic," replied the psychologist. "And will she like my bird drawings?" "I'm absolutely sure she will." 2 weeks later, a new routine was established that brought stability to everyone involved. Every Saturday, Juniper visited her mother at the clinic in the state capital, always accompanied by Eleanor or Sterling. The meetings were supervised initially, but gradually became more natural and spontaneous. The mother was visibly improving with each visit. She had gained healthy weight, her hair was more well-groomed, and above all, there was a new light in her eyes. Seeing her daughter happy and safe seemed to be the best medicine for her mental recovery. "She's becoming a beautiful and intelligent girl," said the mother to Eleanor during one of those visits. "Thank you for taking such good care of her. Thank you for being the mother I couldn't be." "You don't need to thank me," Eleanor replied sincerely. "Juniper has become the daughter I never had. Taking care of her is a gift, not a sacrifice." It was during one of these conversations that the mother made a revelation that surprised everyone, bringing a new dimension to the family story. "There's something you need to know about Juniper's father," she said, looking nervously at Sterling. The businessman felt his heart race. "What do you mean?" He worked at your company too. He was the engineer who took care of the construction projects," she revealed, her hands trembling slightly. Sterling remembered immediately. Juniper's father had been an excellent employee who had left the company at the same time as the mother, claiming to have received a better offer in another state. "He's Juniper's father?" he asked, still processing the surprising information. "Yes, but he doesn't know about her existence. When I found out I was pregnant, he had already moved away. I tried to contact him several times, but I never succeeded," the mother explained. "Why didn't you ever tell me this when you worked for me?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my job, afraid of people's judgment, and when he moved, well, I thought it best to raise Juniper alone than to complicate his life." This revelation brought a new dimension to the situation. Juniper had a living father somewhere, a man who didn't even know of her existence and who had been a respected employee. "Would you like us to try to find her father?" Sterling asked. "His financial resources more than enough to hire investigators." The mother thought for a long moment. "Maybe. When I'm completely well, maybe it's time for Juniper to meet her father too. She deserves to have a complete family." That night back in Willow Creek, Sterling and Eleanor talked about this new revelation while Juniper slept peacefully. "Our family can get even bigger," commented Eleanor, watching the stars through the window. "Are you scared of that?" asked Sterling. "A little," she admitted, "but if it's the best thing for Juniper, we'll face it together. Always together." It was then that Sterling made a decision that had been maturing for weeks, driven by everything they had experienced together. "Eleanor, there's something I want to ask you." "What is it?" "Will you marry me?" The question caught Eleanor completely off guard. They had become life partners, united by the love they shared for Juniper, but marriage had never been discussed between them. She began, clearly surprised. "It's not just because of Juniper," he hastened to explain, "although she has brought us closer in a wonderful way. It's because I've discovered that you're the most generous, brave, and loving person I've ever known, and I can't imagine my life without you by my side." Eleanor looked at this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and changed everything. He had gone from distant neighbor to partner, from stranger to true family. "Yes," she said simply, her heart overflowing with happiness. "Yes, I will marry you." The next morning, Juniper woke up to find the two most important adults in her life with mysterious smiles on their faces, radiating a happiness that she hadn't seen in a long time. "We have a surprise for you," said Eleanor, her eyes shining with joy. "What is it?" asked the child, curious. "Eleanor and I are going to get married. That means he's going to be your daddy officially, and we're going to be a real family on paper too," Sterling explained. Juniper was silent for a moment, processing the information with the seriousness that only a child who has gone through so much can demonstrate. Then her face lit up with the most radiant smile they had ever seen. "Are we going to be a real family for real?" she asked, barely able to contain her excitement. "We already are," replied Sterling, picking her up in his arms. "Now we're just going to make everything official." The months that followed brought a stability that none of the three had experienced before. The wedding of Eleanor and Sterling was a simple and intimate ceremony in the church in Willow Creek, with Juniper as the flower girl wearing a pink dress that she had chosen personally. "Now we are a real family on paper too," Juniper said during the party, holding the hands of the two adults who had become her parents in her heart. The move to the Yellow House finally happened, and Juniper adapted to her new home with an ease that surprised even the psychologist. Her room was painted light blue, with drawings of birds on the walls, no longer the sad black birds she drew at the time of suffering, but colorful and cheerful birds that represented her new life. The weekly visits to the mother became a natural part of the family routine. With each meeting, Juniper and her biological mother got to know each other a little better, gradually building a relationship that respected both the past and the present. "Clinic Mommy," as Juniper had begun to call her to differentiate her from Eleanor, who was simply, "Mommy, you're getting stronger," the child commented during a visit. "I really am, my dear." "And it's because you give me the strength to get better every day," replied the mother, who had truly transformed. Her hair had returned to its natural shine, she had gained healthy weight, and above all, she had regained the serenity that Sterling remembered from when she worked for him. It was during one of those visits that the mother made an announcement that would once again change the dynamics of the family. "The doctor said I can be discharged from the clinic next month," she said, carefully observing everyone's reactions. "I'm going to live in an assisted living facility in the state capital, where I'll have independence, but still psychological support when necessary." The silence that followed was filled with complex emotions. Juniper, now 5 years old and more mature, immediately understood the implications. "Does that mean you can come visit us at our house?" she asked, her eyes shining with hope. "It means exactly that," replied the mother with a genuine smile. "If your parents agree, of course." "Of course we agree," Sterling said immediately, using some of his investment income to facilitate the visits. "You will always be welcome in our house. And maybe," the mother continued hesitantly, "we can start talking about that matter we discussed before." Everyone knew she was referring to Juniper's father. In recent months, Sterling's lawyer had done some discreet investigations and discovered that the father was living in another state, working as a civil engineer and, according to the information collected, single and without other children. "Are you sure you want to contact him?" asked Eleanor, concerned about another change in the child's life. "I think Juniper has the right to meet her father," replied the mother. "But only if you agree. You are her parents now, and I respect that completely." Juniper, who was listening to everything with a maturity beyond her age, asked the question that everyone was waiting for. "If I meet my blood daddy, will you still be my parents?" "Forever," promised Sterling, hugging her. "Nothing and no one can change that. We are a family, and true families stay together regardless of what happens." Chapter 14. 2 weeks later, an extraordinary meeting took place in the Yellow House that would forever change the definition of family for everyone involved. Juniper's biological father had accepted the invitation to meet the daughter he didn't know existed, and was now sitting nervously in the living room, looking at the child with a mixture of amazement and deep emotion. "She has your eyes," commented the mother, who had been released from the clinic the day before, and was making her first visit to her daughter's new home. "And your determined way of tilting your head when you're thinking." The father, a tall, dark-haired man of 35, watched Juniper with absolute fascination. "I can't believe I have a daughter," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion, "and that she is so beautiful and intelligent." "Do you want to see my drawings, new daddy?" asked Juniper, naturally using the name she had decided to give him. Her ability to adapt and accept love from multiple sources continued to impress all the adults. "Of course I want to," he replied, clearly touched by being called Daddy for the first time in his life. During the following hours, a new family dynamic began to form in a surprisingly natural way. The biological father was genuinely interested in getting to know Juniper and in being part of her life, but also respectful of the fundamental role of Sterling and Eleanor. "You saved my daughter," he said to the couple during a private conversation. "And you gave her something I could never have offered alone, a stable and loving family. I am eternally grateful for that." "She saved us too," replied Eleanor sincerely. "She taught us what true unconditional love is." It was decided that the biological father would visit Juniper once a month, and that they would gradually try to build a father-daughter relationship that complemented, not competed with, the bonds she had already formed. "Now I have 4 parents," Juniper joked one night as Eleanor put her to sleep. "Daddy, Mommy, Clinic Mommy, and new Daddy." "And we all love you very much," replied Eleanor, kissing the child's forehead. In the following month, something extraordinary and unexpected happened. The aunt, who had spent the last months in treatment for alcoholism and in mandatory psychological therapy, asked through her new lawyer to meet Juniper. The initial request was denied by all responsible adults, but the psychologist suggested that it might be therapeutic for both. "Not to re-establish bonds," she explained carefully, "but so that Juniper can confront her past from a position of strength and security, and so that the aunt can properly apologize." The meeting was meticulously organized, with all parents present and with strictly limited duration. The aunt, visibly transformed by the treatment, apologized to Juniper with sincere tears in her eyes. "I was very sick in my mind and heart," she said, her voice broken by regret. "And I hurt you in ways that should never have happened. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I deeply regret everything." Juniper, now more mature and secure, looked at the woman who had once been her source of terror. "Aunt, you hurt me a lot, but now I'm happy and safe with my family." "I know, and I'm happy that you've found people who truly love you. It's what you've always deserved," replied the aunt, demonstrating a genuine transformation. The meeting was brief, but it brought a sense of closure that helped Juniper move forward completely without carrying fear or resentment from the past. A year later, life in the Yellow House had found a perfect rhythm that seemed almost magical. Juniper attended an excellent local school where she was one of the most beloved students, always drawing colorful birds and telling about her big and loving family. The biological mother had moved to a small apartment in the state capital and worked part-time as an administrative assistant, visiting her daughter every week. The biological father came from his distant state once a month, always bringing carefully chosen gifts and stories about his work as an engineer. "You know what impresses me the most?" said the psychologist during one of her regular visits, watching Juniper play in the garden. "How she managed to integrate all these relationships without confusion or conflict. She simply accepted that she can have many people who love her." "Children are wiser than adults sometimes," Sterling commented, watching his stepdaughter teach a song to the real birds that visited the yard. Eleanor smiled, thinking about how her life had completely changed. From a lonely retired educator, she had become a mother, a wife, and the center of an unconventional but deeply loving family. "Who would have thought that a girl who suffered in silence would change so many lives?" she commented, watching the child who now laughed freely. "She didn't just change our lives," replied Sterling, his investments continuing to yield enough to comfortably support the entire expanded family. "She taught us that family isn't about blood or social conventions. It's about love, protection, and conscious choice." At that moment, Juniper ran to them, holding a new drawing. A yellow house surrounded by colorful birds, with 6 figures holding hands in front. Her, Eleanor, Sterling, her biological mother, her biological father, and, in a recent addition, the psychologist who had become an essential part of their lives. "Look," she said proudly, "my complete family." And it really was. A family built not by chance or tradition, but by choice, love, and the determination of adults who decided that a child deserved all the happiness in the world. 2 years later, on the eve of Juniper's 7th birthday, a final discovery brought the perfect closure to a story that had begun with so much suffering. Eleanor was organizing some old papers when she found a sealed letter that had belonged to the previous owner of the yellow house. "Look at this," she said to Sterling, carefully opening the letter dated 5 years ago. The letter was addressed to whoever cares for this house after me, and was signed by a lady who had lived there before them. "Whoever finds this letter," Sterling read aloud, "should know that this house was built to house love and healing. For 50 years, I raised here 4 children who were not born from my womb, but from my heart. Children who arrived wounded by life and left healed by love. This house has a special energy for that." Eleanor covered her mouth with her hands, touched by the discovery. "She also adopted wounded children. And we didn't even know," Sterling murmured. "It's like the house chose us." At that moment, Juniper ran into the office, all dirty with earth from the garden where she played with the birds that were now practically domesticated from so much she talked to them. "What are you looking at?" she asked, curious. "A letter from a lady who lived here before us," Eleanor explained. "She also took care of special children like you, like me. Children who needed a lot of love to get well," Sterling said, hugging her. "Oh," Juniper said naturally, "that's why I felt at home here from the first day." The simplicity of the answer touched both adults deeply. At 7 years old, she possessed a wisdom and a capacity for forgiveness that continued to impress everyone around her. The next day, during the birthday party, the entire unconventional family was gathered in the garden of the yellow house. The biological mother had brought a homemade cake, the first time in years that she felt well enough to cook. The biological father had traveled especially for the occasion, bringing a gift he had made personally, a birdhouse that he had built in his workshop. "For your bird friends," he said, installing the birdhouse in Juniper's favorite tree. The psychologist was there too, no longer as a therapist, but as a family friend who had become. Even Bethany had brought her little daughter to play with the birthday girl. "I want to make a toast," Sterling said, raising his glass of orange juice. Juniper had insisted that everyone drink the same thing. "To a special girl who taught us that family isn't about perfection, but about unconditional love. And to all of you," said the biological mother, her voice firm and clear, "who saved my daughter when I couldn't do it." "We didn't save anyone," Eleanor corrected. "Juniper saved us all. She showed us how to love unconditionally, how to forgive without resentment, and how to build something beautiful from pain." Juniper, who was at the center of all this attention, smiled her radiant smile and made her own little toast with her kiddie cup. "I want to thank you," she said in her clear voice, "for having so many people who love me, and for having learned that even when bad things happen, good things can always appear later." At that moment, as if it had been combined, a flock of robins landed on the tree where the new birdhouse was, singing a cheerful melody that sounded like a celebration of life. "Look," exclaimed Juniper, "even the birds are singing happy birthday." And so, 5 years after that first cry that had cut through the afternoon air, a story of suffering had definitively transformed into a story of love, redemption, and hope. The girl who once drew trapped and sad birds now drew free and colorful birds. And in that simple transformation of a child was contained all the magic of a family that chose each other, of a love that healed deep wounds, and of a hope that proved to be stronger than any pain. In the yellow house surrounded by flower gardens, An unconventional but deeply united family continued writing their love story, one happy day at a time, proving that sometimes the most beautiful endings are born from the most difficult beginnings. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.